Hello, and welcome to part two of the 2019 Professional Development Webcast Series. I'm Steve Athanas, and I serve as the president of VMUG. We're really excited to bring this educational webcast series to you in partnership with Innovatus Group and the Learning Studio. Today's webcast topic is something I'm personally very interested in. We're calling it Disruption 2.0, How Not to Get Hit by the Oncoming Train. Hopefully, this session will be as interactive as always, so don't forget to submit your questions so we can make sure to get you answers to them at the end of our presentation today. And now, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our presenter, Deborah Zabladil, CEO and founder of the Learning Studio. Deborah, welcome back to the webcast. I'll turn it over to you so we can dive right in.
Thanks so much, Steve. And I do think you missed your calling as a radio host. What a lovely introduction and voice you have there. Really?
Thanks. Little known fact, I did DJ on air many years ago.
Well, there you go. I can tell. Well, thank you, Steve, for having me. And it's really great to be back with this audience again. I always love working with the VMUG members, And as you recall, our last month's program was on leading through change. So this is a really great add-on to that particular program. If you happen to be on that program, I think it will build on what we talked about. If you didn't happen to be on that particular program, you will not be left out because this program works very well on its own too. But really, when we talk about change, there's incremental change, and then there is, intended strategic change, and then there's disruption. And really, we're talking about disruption today. We're not talking about that incremental change and, things that we look at sort of every day. We are talking about things that happen either to our world, our community, our profession, et cetera, that really change the landscape of how we work and what we're doing. So with that, I want to kind of go into first, just what does the word disruption mean to you? I'd love to hear that because we all come from, a different standpoint in terms of what disruption might mean to us, and it means a lot of different things to different people. So if you would take to the question box, I would be thrilled to see what you have to say about, when you hear the word disruption, what comes to mind? What is it that you think about when you hear the word disruption? So again, the question box should be in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if you just hit the little arrow, it will expand and you can type your response in right there. Okay, we're getting some really good feedback here. Some people are saying, so one person says, a new way of doing things. Another person says, significant job role changes. Another change. Another unwelcoming changes. Another unexpected change to the current paradigm. Thank you for those responses. Very good responses to that question. And I think it shows how differently people view the word disruption. It used to be that disruption was, had a fairly negative connotation to it. It was thought of as something very negative and, certainly unexpected, but it didn't really mean that it was something good that was happening to you or your profession or your job. That's changed a bit over the years. We're going to talk about the true definition of disruptive innovation, but we hear the word disruption so much. It's almost a badge of honor now that many corporate reports are now showing that the word disruption is showing up in so many different ways and in so many in so much language that we use around business. And many times we're really not talking about disruption. We're really just talking about change. So let's look at the sort of classic definition by Clayton Christensen from Harvard, who really was the person who brought this concept of disruptive innovation into the fold. And the way he defines it is, as you see on the screen, a process by which a product or a service takes root initially in simple applications at the bottom of a market. So this is the key part, at the bottom of a market, and then relentlessly moves up market, eventually replacing established competitors. So isn't that an interesting thing to think about? It doesn't mean that that the organization, the company, the concept that is almost leading the pack goes to first place. What it means is something is happening that may seem like something we should push aside, something that we shouldn't be paying attention to at the bottom of a market, and then it relentlessly moves up, eventually replacing established competitors. So it sort of takes the lead in the market from a place that is quite very much at the bottom. When we think about examples of this, we can think about a lot, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But essentially, when we think about these disruptors, they are companies that are doing something very different that, again, we are, or people, or, processes that we are not paying attention to until sometimes it's too late. So consider this. Uber is the world's largest transportation company that owns no cars. Alibaba is the world's largest e-commerce company that owns no products. Facebook is the world's largest communications company that creates no content. And Airbnb is the world's largest accommodation company that owns no property. This is really, really different than the way things used to work, right? And when we look at the Brian Chesky, who is the co-founder of Airbnb, and Travis Kalanick, who was the founder of Uber, these two folks were the youngest to ever make the Forbes billionaires list, and that was in 2015. Now, we follow their path and their trail, and a lot has happened since then. And we're going to talk about that. What happens when disruption starts moving in a direction that's not always positive? So we'll talk about that as we get through this. Kodak. Does anyone know the story of Kodak? I hope you all do. If you don't, let me just remind you or fill you in on kind of what happened to Kodak. Kodak had the opportunity to be the disruptor in the digital camera realm of, how we look at photography. But remember, what was Kodak known for? Kodak was known for film. Kodak was known for film developing. Many of you might remember that there were these little drive-thrus that you would go up to, and you could drop your film off, and you would pick it up in a week. And mine now that I used to go to when I was a teenager is a drive-thru Starbucks. That isn't a sign of the times. But what happened with Kodak is they had the opportunity to be the disruptor. They had an opportunity to be the leader because they were the first company to ever develop a digital camera. But they were not aggressive enough, and they were fearful of killing what was their cash cow, which was the film business. So they sort of put it on the shelf. They did not go aggressively to market with the digital camera, and much lesser known competitors moved their way up the market and eventually displaced Kodak, and Kodak went out of, filed for bankruptcy. So it's an interesting story, and I think it's a cautionary tale that sometimes we can be innovative, we can do amazing things, we can create great product within our company, but if we don't act on it, if we don't execute, if we don't move it to market fast enough, someone else will, and we will be potentially out of business, but certainly we won't have an opportunity to be the leader in that particular product area. And here is a picture of one of these Kodak film booths. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, but I always laugh at every time I see this, and it reminds me of that 70s show as well, where the guy is working at the Kodak booth. So let's look at a few examples of disruptors and disruptees. The personal computer was the disruptor for the mainframe. Do you all remember, anyone remember, when we used to have mainframe computers, and when something would go wrong, some poor IT person would have to go and fix the mainframe. Maybe some of you were in those roles back then. Everyone had a hardwired telephone. Very few, even homes now, have hardwired telephones. we exist off our cell phones. And I frankly have for several years now. It's something I never could have imagined doing, but I found that it was actually more of a nuisance to have a hardwired phone at home because I never remembered to check my voicemail. So a lot of people have gone that way. It's something that we couldn't have imagined many years ago. Four-year colleges, as the job market has shifted, as it's becoming harder and harder to find a job with a four-year degree, community colleges, trade schools, many other options for education are popping up and are really coming into play. Not to mention Udemy and the Khan Academy and all of those really great, Coursera, those great companies where you can go online and learn anything from how to, change the oil in your car to how to, program a computer, to how to manage a project, to how to create an ad campaign. So we have so many ways to educate ourselves now. And it's not all about the four-year college anymore. We always used to go to full-service department stores at malls, right? So they were traditional malls, bricks and mortar, and we would walk around a mall and we'd go from store to store. We now have discount retailers everywhere. We have discount malls, but further than that, we do a lot of our shopping online. There is an association out there that is called the International Council of Shopping Centers, and I actually did some work for them for a while ago, and they talk a lot about this, about what to do to attract purchasers to bricks and mortar locations when it is so easy to order online. And that has given way, as many of you have probably seen, to the malls becoming more like entertainment complexes. So a traditional mall that doesn't have, a movie theater and bars and restaurants is almost getting hard to find because, again, they've been disrupted. Traditional doctor's offices, that was always the way we went. And now we have retail medical clinics and a whole host of other places to, get a quick checkup or a shot, or, we can get our flu shot just about anywhere now. I have an interesting story that my daughter, as some of you parents might relate to the story, many years ago, she was playing sports. And on Friday, she told me she needed her sports physical handed in by early Monday morning. So needless to say, nothing was open over the weekend. We couldn't get in to see her doctor. I was a little miffed that she waited so long to let me know this. But what we ended up doing was we ended up going to a retail medical clinic. And I have to tell you, it was the best physical she has ever gotten in her life. She saw the clinician, who was a nurse, an RN, for a longer period of time than we ever have at a traditional doctor's office. I think it cost $65 out of pocket. It was, I paid with my credit card. We walked out. She had a fabulous physical, and we got it handled in a short period of time. So again, when we see things like a traditional doctor's office, where it might take a month to get an appointment, and you might sit in the waiting room for an hour or an hour and a half, and then you might sit in the treatment room for an hour or an hour and a half, and then, you're getting 5 minutes of a doctor's time. People are realizing, companies are realizing, innovators are realizing there is a better way. So when we have systems that are not operating well or not operating at peak efficiency, that's when people start to look for workarounds to the system, and that's when disruption can tend to happen. So I think they're all really good examples. 3D printing. This is one of those things that I want to just tell you a story about how it concerns me sometimes that companies and industries aren't talking enough about some of the disruptions that are facing them or that are on the horizon. I was working with a supply chain group, and it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And we started talking, we were doing a leadership course, and we started talking about 3D printing. And I asked them how many of them were talking about 3D printing in their companies, and did they have strategies around 3D printing, and how were they going to be handling that, as opposed to the very traditional way of supply chain where we, stocked, the shelves, and we kept, a lot of hard assets and warehouse things. And, now we have this innovation called 3D printing. it shocked me that in a room of about 65 people, only a couple said that their company was even having that conversation. And that was, like I said, about 8 years ago. So we have to be looking at things that are coming on the horizon. To me, that was a very, very direct disruption to the supply chain industry, and they were not really having that conversation. So it's, it goes back to one of the things that we talk about a lot in leadership, which is sometimes we have to work on the business and not just in the business. And working on the business means we need to always be looking out onto the horizon. We need to always be thinking about what is coming next. And when we see something happening, whether it's, sort of in a macroeconomic way, or, something is going on in politics, or something is happening, that's a world event, or some kind of a trend that's happening, we need to take a look at that and say, how might this affect me, my work, my company's work, and what my customers are going to experience? Because if we can get ahead of what trouble, challenges, angst our customers will have, then we can get on board with providing solutions to those potential problems before they even know they have them. But we have to be looking at the horizon. We cannot always have our heads down and just be, thinking about the here and now. So again, 3D modeling. I was at a radiology show about 3 months ago, and they have a whole area on their exhibit floor, and it was all the 3D, body parts and, bone replacement and joints and et cetera, that they are using now in radiology. And it was absolutely fascinating to really, look at how they're looking at what they're doing now. Subscription, everything. This is something, again, that we could not have imagined many years ago. If you have, an email address, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram or any of those, you probably see a lot of things that come in front of you that are subscription services. It might be something around knowledge acquisition, that there's a webinar series or a seminar series that you can sign up for to learn a specific skill. It might be that there's coaching. It might be, the Dollar Shave Club, which became a huge phenomenon and had also some very, very sharp advertising to go along with it. But when we think about some things like this, why wouldn't we subscribe to things that we need consistently and we're going to need to replace on an ongoing basis? So, of course, Amazon has gotten, hip to that for quite some time. And now we can order things that are on a recurring order on Amazon. But, I'm always thinking about, what kinds of things can my clients be doing that would bring customers in and keep them on an ongoing basis through a subscription or something along those lines. The shared economy. We talked a lot about the shared economy at the beginning when we talked about Uber, when we talked about Airbnb. There are so many ways that we share things now. And I think it's obviously it's a very smart way to go in many respects, because we don't have to purchase anymore a home necessarily in sunny Florida when we can go on Airbnb anytime and we can stay in a beautifully appointed home for much less, of course, than you would paying a mortgage or even rent on a place like that. So many of these things are great innovations, and it's become a way of life in the past few years. But remember, just probably 5 or 6 years ago, we didn't have all these subscription services that we do now. I don't know how many of you have done urban bike rentals. In many cities in the South, I was just in Los Angeles, in Austin, Texas, I know they have these kind of scooters that, it's funny, they don't even lock into sort of a holder like this. They actually, people just swipe their credit card, they pick them up off the sidewalk, they scoot down the street, and they drop them anywhere in the city. It doesn't have to be at a particular drop-off location. They drop them and off they go into a restaurant. And when they come out, it might be still there. It might be another one that's there. They might have to go a few blocks down. There'll be one lying on the sidewalk or laying in the grass. So very, very interesting how we have been able to, again, when we go to different cities and we're not able to bring our bikes, if we're flying somewhere, we're able to spend an afternoon bike riding now if we'd like to. So issues around disruption that we need to think about. Those that are happy with the status quo. So for some of you, you will think this whole concept of disruption is very positive and it excites you. You want to be on board with the disruptions that are coming. You'd like to be a disruptor. The other half of you are probably thinking, make it stop. Stop the madness. I don't want things to change this drastically all the time. So there are always going to be people in both camps. And when people are happy with the way things are, particularly if they're invested in it. We remember when Uber came out and the taxi cab unions were very, very unhappy that Uber was coming out. And they were even trying to shut them down in many cities, New York, et cetera. And then, what interestingly has happened is many of the taxi cab drivers then became Uber drivers. So in Chicago, where I'm from, I would see, the taxi cab moniker on the top of the vehicle. And then in the window, there'd be an Uber sticker. And sometimes there'd also be a Lyft sticker. So it was the whole kind of, if you can't beat them, join them mentality. And they would, they realized there was no point in digging their heels in anymore. Uber was here to stay. Ride sharing is certainly here to stay. And they got on board, and many of them are doing all three now. There can also be, when we talk about membership, in VMUG, you're a member of VMUG, there can be an uprising or a revolt in the membership. So some company could, or maybe already has, enter your market that could be a disruptor to everything the rest of the members are doing. That could easily happen, particularly in technology. I think it's not, difficult to envision that could happen at some point. When those kinds of things happen, sometimes the rest of the membership is first saying, oh, this is a company that they don't know what they're doing. They'll never last. That model will never work. That's what we hear a lot of in professions when there's a disruptor that's sort of making their way up into that professional space. Then, that group starts to gobble up a little more market share, and there may be a feeling of, we've got to keep them out. We've got to keep them away, and we've got to hold tight to what we're doing because this is how we were founded. This is what we were founded on. This is the way we all do business, et cetera. You might ultimately have to learn to work and live under the same tent, and it can shine a spotlight on industries that were previously under the radar. I'm going to go back and just stop on this for a minute, and I'm going to tell you a story about an industry that I happened to work with that I thought was a really, really interesting thing happened to them. There's a group of vacation rental owners that started an association. So I don't know if you remember, before Airbnb, before HomeAway and all of those, we would go potentially to a small community or a lakeside community or a seaside community, and there might be, a handful of rental homes that would be located in that community that you could call, a small company, and you could say, I'd like to rent a home, and they'd place you in a home. Sometimes the owner of the home would be there to greet you, or the owner of this vacation company would be there to greet you. They started an association many years ago. In fact, what's interesting about it, it was the first membership group that I worked with when I started my company 15 years ago. Through the course of time, they started seeing a VRBO, which is vacation rental by owners, which was ultimately purchased by HomeAway. And when that started happening, these were pretty much small operators, mom and pop, family businesses, and they said, we're not sure we want VRBO to be part of our membership because we are intended to be small owners, privately held small companies in these communities, and that's the way we want to keep it. Well, lo and behold, VRBO became a bigger and a bigger player, and they realized that, okay, it might be time to let in, VRBO, which became HomeAway, because they realized with these two companies, which became one, they now could still operate as a small company, but now they could use those two, or eventually one, companies as marketing vehicles for their homes. So that didn't shut them down. It didn't put them out of business. It actually gave them further marketing reach. So even though there was an issue at the beginning where they felt very threatened by these companies, they came to realize, we can still operate the way we operate. Now we have greater reach. Now it's easier for us to, for someone in San Francisco to be able to rent one of my homes in the Outer Banks. So that sort of happened. Then Airbnb came along. And Airbnb, of course, was one of those companies that, again, started at the bottom of the market, relentlessly worked its way up. And initially it was, they're not one of us. This is not what we stand for. We're not in people's, we adhere to regulations. We're not talking about, putting someone on a couch in my home or in a spare bedroom. And they really were somewhat resistant to bringing them into the membership. Lo and behold, they did, of course, eventually let them join, and they became, a big player. And now a lot of them also use Airbnb as a marketing channel. But what's very interesting about this story is that here was an industry that was really kind of flying under the radar. It was a very unregulated industry. It was small. It wasn't bringing in billions of dollars. So it was, relatively unnoticed. When Airbnb joined the fold, and there was a lot of disruption around that happening, there were, I don't know if you remember, innkeepers in New York City and San Francisco and some of these other places were very unhappy about Airbnb because they had to comply with a lot of regulation around, the Americans with Disabilities Act, around having sprinkler systems in their inns, et cetera. And all of a sudden, all these homes came on, and they didn't have to comply with the same amount of regulation, which also costs money, which means it's more expensive to operate. So because of that, the regulators started paying attention to the entire industry. And it was a little bit concerning for a period of time. What ultimately saved the vacation rental industry was that they have a credential. So their association offers a credential that anyone who owns a rental management company can go through, and what it signifies is safety and quality, et cetera. So any credentialed organization has gone through a series of really rigorous checks that they had to go through on safety, on can people exit the building, and cleanliness, and all of those things, and the regulators backed off. So this is to say that it can happen to any industry, it can happen at any time, and when and if you do see in your industry a company start bubbling up and getting more and more market share, it might be that they are about to disrupt the status quo and how you're operating as a profession right now. So again, some visions here of when Uber was first coming on board, and the taxi cabs striking, but it is obviously a very different world. And what does it have to do with you all, other than the fact that it could happen to you? So we're experiencing the highest rate of change out there, but companies are failing to adapt. That is concerning in and of itself. Again, we talked about leading through change last month, and just thinking about some of the things we talked about as you all are doing your work, in any profession, as people are doing their work, and as you are leading, projects and leading people, it's really important to have conversations about change. It's really important to be making people cognizant of what is on the horizon. And it might be leaders, it might be, your staff team, it might be your peers. Sometimes you will be the disruptor, sometimes you will be the disruptee, and sometimes you will be reading the tea leaves to anticipate what's coming. Clearly, there are disruptions that have happened that many of us could not have seen coming. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking. We have to be reading the tea leaves. We have to be reading between the lines. We have to be paying attention not just to our competitors that own the same space that we do and run in the same professional circles that we do, but we have to be paying attention to all of the things that go on. And this is the case of the Vacation Rental Managers Association, which I told you about just a little bit ago. The VRBO, the HomeAway, and ultimately Airbnb, the regulators coming in, and then the credentials saving them. This is a really interesting case study as well. And I'd like to give you this example too, because this will show you that disruption can come in places that you would never expect. So the plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery market, let's talk about that just as a professional, area for a moment. So for a while, board certified plastic surgeons were who everyone went to if they wanted to have plastic surgery. Then a number of cosmetic surgeons came on the scene, and they had increased visibility through the American Board of Cosmetic Surgery. So they became a bona fide profession, and many people now seek out cosmetic surgeons as well as plastic surgeons. Then we have other specialties, like the oral and maxillofacial surgeons who do head and neck surgery. They do head and neck surgery around cancer and cleft lip, palate reconstruction, et cetera. And they now perform plastic surgery, including facelifts. And then we have these quasi-spa and surgery centers that are doing certainly a lot of injectables and things like that. So this market has already been disrupted. And, as you can imagine, the board-certified plastic surgeons are trying to hold on to their place in the market, saying, you don't want to go to a surgery center or a quasi-spa. You don't want someone who is not trained to be a board-certified plastic surgeon to be doing any of your plastic surgery. So then we move on and we look at this data. From 2000 to 2016, minimally invasive procedures and injectables rose by 180%, with audiences far younger than ever before. So this doesn't mean full facelifts. This means minimally invasive procedures and injectables like Botox and things like that. I would love for you to take to, again, the question box, and I'm asking you, why do you think this happened? From 2000 to 2016, the number of procedures rose by 180% with far younger audiences than ever before. Why did that happen? I love some of these answers. You all have great creative answers. Someone said the Kardashians. Yeah, that absolutely could be the case. It was cheaper and more available. Sure. Reality TV. Yes. Ease of access. Social media. Price and availability. Movies, TV, magazine, and brainwashing. I love it all. I'm going to say, and someone else said social media. It's very, very close. And when you see it, you might giggle. It's the selfie. And again, the selfies are put on social media. So those of you who said social media, we're definitely thinking along the right path. Think about how people take selfies now, almost, to a nauseating degree. Young people take selfies. Older people take selfies. But what happens many times when we take a selfie? We turn the camera back to ourselves, we zoom in on that photo, and we look at every imperfection that we have. And sometimes then we're putting a filter on it, or we're doing something to make ourselves look better, right? Because we're all very self-critical. And when we're taking a photo of ourselves that close up, we're looking at it and we're saying, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had those wrinkles or that blemish or, whatever the case may be. So what they found out is this consistent taking of selfies, and yes, putting it on social media, has actually increased the number of non-invasive or minimally invasive surgical procedures that have been happening in the past 19 years now, from 2000 to 2016 when this really rose. I think that's interesting. And what's most interesting about it is here that, the first slide talked about the fact that board-certified plastic surgeons are being disrupted by cosmetic surgeons, then disrupted by oral and maxillofacial surgeons, on and on we go. And then that was sort of anticipated, because that was more, within the realm of other people providing that same service. So it was in their tangential, at least, professional circle. But who would have thought that the demand would go up based on something that has to do with your phone, right? That was something that they never could have anticipated. Of course, it's a very happy occurrence for people that are in that professional line of work because now they're busier than they've ever been. But it just goes to say that you may find disruption within your industry. You may find disruption from a source outside your industry, which is why you always have to pay attention to everything that's going on around you, not just what's happening in your particular sector or your particular specialty, because it is really important to know if other disruptions are coming. So let's reflect on this. One thing I want to talk about for a moment is millennials. In many circles that talk about disruption and that talk about millennials, it's sort of a well-known fact that millennials are disruptors. They are disrupting the way we do business. They're disrupting the way we hire. They're disrupting the way we incentivize and the way we try to retain employees. They're disrupting the way we market our products and services. And there might be some of you out there that are saying, well, every generation has been a disruptor, and certainly every generation has brought about change. But the millennial generation, because they're the biggest ever generation, bigger than the boomers, they are really disrupting because they have power and influence. In fact, by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials. That is not very far off, as we all know. So, if we look at some statistics around the millennials, and just even up to 2015, with the millennials, taking over the civilian labor force. So certainly we have boomers that are working later and later all the time. We have Gen Xers that are also certainly in that labor force mix. But millennials, again, will be 75% of the workforce by 2025. That's only 6 years away. We have got to understand this generation. We've got to understand how to employ them. We've got to understand them as consumers. And we've got to understand how we need to do things differently than we have before to make sure that we're responding appropriately to this disruption. The digital, certainly everything that we're doing digitally is also a disruptor. And in many cases, particularly in your work, I would imagine it might be a positive disruptor, but it's a disruptor nonetheless. It's something that has changed the way that we do business. And it certainly has changed the way that the generations relate to each other, and in some cases has caused a bigger generation gap than we've seen before. Because, traditionally, the younger we are, the more adept we are at being very conversant. The millennials were digital natives. They have been playing on iPads and iPhones since they were, in diapers. That's very, very different than a baby boomer or a traditionalist that are older and have, had this come into play in their careers much later. So it's interesting. I was talking to a friend who's a real estate agent in Southwest Florida. He just started getting into real estate. And one of the things he said is, and he's a baby boomer, but in Southwest Florida, there are a lot of people that are working, well into their 70s and 80s. And he said he saw himself having a real opportunity with the younger market that's starting to move down here because he's more digitally savvy, because he will text, because he will, promote things on Instagram and Snapchat and do things that older realtors aren't willing to do. So he is able to relate better to a younger market. I thought that was really interesting because he's pushing 60 himself. But, in some communities, that's still relatively young. And he does happen to be the kind of person that is very technologically savvy, and it's working to his benefit. So, we're making payments. This is no news to you. How many people are making payments via smartphones and how we're doing business now? And payments in a whole host of different ways. It's not just buying an app. It's not just buying a T-shirt. It's not just, having laundry detergent sent to you, but it's buying cars and it's buying consulting services. And these things are all done now via, people's phones. And what we're talking about is we have to always have products that are, digital friendly. And really, that's where we should be spending a lot of our money and a lot of our time and a lot of our effort. So let's talk about the next generation of disruption for a minute. The next generation of disruption, we're not necessarily sure what it's going to be. But here are a few things to think about. Certainly, Uber has had its problems. Uber, it took a very long time and the turnover of its CEO to really get the company, moving along on a more healthy path. But it was unprofitable for years, and it still has issues. It's had internal issues. It's had financial issues. It's had issues with the way it pays its drivers, et cetera. So just because you're a disruptor, just because you're early on the scene, just because you're making the rules of the new game does not mean that you have a thriving business. So one of the things that, I think many companies are realizing is that if they want to disrupt, they also have to think and really look at the trajectory of the future of that disruption. Because once they disrupt, they're not going to be alone for long in the market. Certainly it didn't take Lyft very long to become the second biggest player. And they are just not always guaranteed that spot. And when we're disrupting and when we're seeing rapid growth, sometimes other things like corporate culture and keeping abreast of what's happening out in the field with employees and in their case drivers doesn't get as much attention as it should. And that can be the death knell of any company. So as we look at the next generation of disruption, I think we're going to see some players that are going to drop out that are currently leaders. We'll see some that will, of course, continue to disrupt in all new ways that we probably can't even anticipate. And we'll see some that are potentially thinking a little bit more long-term and maybe disrupting in a slightly more measured way than some of the disruptors have in the past. Because if you can't be in it for the long term, it may not be something that you want to do. Now, on the other hand, when we're looking at serial entrepreneurs in some of these cases that are starting these disruptive companies. Many of them don't care if the company is around for the long term. They want to start the company, they want to scale the company big, and they want to sell the company and get out and move on to something else. So again, that's not always good for the consumer. It's not always good for the end user and the customer. So we have to think when we're talking about disruption, if you want to be a disruptor, what does that mean? And what does it mean for your customer base? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for how long that company should be able to sustain itself into the future? Are we just disrupting to bring something new to market, to grow quickly and to sell, or are we trying to make it for the long haul? So these are all things that are really being looked at and talked about as more disruption comes into play every day. So let's connect the dots here. We need to connect the dots for ourselves, and we need to connect the dots for others. And again, if you are seeing that there is a disruption coming toward your company or your industry or the particular, specialty that you have in your line of work, and others aren't seeing it, sometimes we really do need to connect the dots. The smartest people in the room sometimes miss those connections. So if you have the ability to see that, if you have the ability to anticipate something, the onus is on you to help educate others. And really it's an education. It's not a telling them, because we can tell people all day long and they won't necessarily believe it. We have to really educate them about it. We have to play out the scenario. We have to show them, if we don't get on board or if we don't get ahead of this, this is the trajectory of what our company is going to look like in 5 years, or something along those lines. Don't dismiss product and service hacks. So when you see, if it's your business, your company, and by yours I mean a company that you're employed in or a company that you own, if you see that your customers or anyone in any of your stakeholders are starting to create backdoor hacks, workarounds for something that you're doing, it may mean that there's a disruption on the horizon. It may mean that your market is telling you that something is needed, that a modification is needed, that a change is needed, that a significant redesign is needed. We have to be paying attention to those things rather than dismissing them as easily and as quickly as we have in the past. We need to pay close attention to industry partners who appear to be gobbling up market share. So again, we think about how someone that is at the bottom of the market starts to get, maybe more and more customers or become more and more popular, or there's more and more buzz around that company, we have to be aware of that, and we have to really take a look at it and say, what are they doing? How will it affect us? Do we need to get on board? Do we need to get in front of it? And the only way to get in front of it is to really be looking at the horizon and to be talking about these things on a consistent basis. Or are we going to be left in its dust? And sometimes, we're not going to see it coming, as I said before. We all know that. There are some things that have happened that we just couldn't have imagined until they hit the market. But there are also other things. And again, when I look at some of these industries that I've had just a little bit of contact with, and I see some of the disruptions that have happened to them and how they were, with what we know now about disruption and how it happens, we could have easily seen that those forces were going to be major players in the future. I want to tell you a story that's an interesting political, non-offensive story, I hope. And that is that I was doing a presentation on disruption the day after the 2016 election. I was going to a group in Wisconsin, and I was driving up that morning, and I think I was doing a keynote presentation around noon that day. So, watching the election results the night before, and by any stretch, Donald Trump's win is a classic case of disruption. And it hit me that night. So months before the election, I had said to the planner, I don't know if you realize, but the day that I'm going to be speaking is the day after election day. We're going to have people in the room that are on one side or the other, right? They're not all going to be like-minded when it comes to how the election, results should turn out. But I think that what I need to do is address it because it's going to be the elephant in the room. And I think what I should do is say, we know there was a presidential election last night. Let's put this aside and let's, really focus on what we're here to do today and try to, kind of clear our mind of all the clutter of the election. So, as the election is coming up and coming up and coming up, and, we're thinking that we know how it's going to turn out. And then, of course, Donald Trump wins the election. So as I thought about it on my 2-hour drive up to Wisconsin, I started thinking, this is a textbook definition of disruption. When we think back to Clayton Christensen's definition, someone that was at the bottom of the market, remember Donald Trump and Melania coming down the escalator in Trump Tower, and there were very few people that were clapping, et cetera. And then we go to the debate stage, and there were so many candidates, so we start, maybe there was, I think there's always 10 when they start. And then there were 8, and then there were 6, and he's still there, and he's still there, and he's still there. And all the other candidates are brushing him aside, are saying it's a joke, are saying, this is going to be the end of him, and this is going to be the end of his candidacy, et cetera. And lo and behold, he becomes the Republican nominee, and then he wins the election. Classic definitional case of disruption. So when I got to the client, I said, I have to lead with this story. I have to lead with this story because we just experienced exactly what I'm talking about today. So, of course, I did it in a nonpartisan way, but a picture of him at the podium was my first slide that morning. A classic case of disruption. It goes to show you that it's not always industry. It can be politics. It can be, societal issues. There's so many ways that disruption happens. But again, we have to pay attention to who is gobbling up market share. And we can't laugh at it. We can't push it away, and we can't think we know best. And what do they know because they're trying to do something different? It's going to go away. It might just be the next disruptor. Continue to look for innovation. So continue to look for innovation everywhere. If you want to potentially be a company that disrupts in an innovative way, there needs to be a constant look toward innovation. And that's so, so important in terms of, just keeping abreast of what's going on and how you can always become better at what you do. Always become better at what you do. Even industry leaders can never rest on their laurels. Again, in some of the companies that I work with, I see very successful organizations that are putting way too much weight on one product line, on one service line, on one product for all its revenue, and they feel in sort of in an underlying fashion that it won't go away, that it won't be disrupted. And in cases like that, I really, we have talks about that all the time with these, kinds of companies, is that you cannot assume that your cash cow will always be your cash cow. If someone disrupts that particular product, that particular event, whatever it is, what happens to the vitality and the health of the company, and what happens to the employees, et cetera? So we've always got to be looking at, no matter how good we are, we've always got to be looking at new ways of doing things. Think about Kodak, industry leader, resting on their laurels, trying to protect and preserve the one cash cow that they had at the time, which was the film market, and they missed the opportunity and they filed bankruptcy. Making disruption a topic of discussion with your members or with your staff. So, if you happen to be, an officer in VMUG, this is an important thing to talk about as an industry. If you are a leader on a team in one of the companies that VMUG services, with its employees or members of VMUG, it's important to have these conversations. What is happening? It doesn't have to happen every week, but certainly minimally quarterly, you should probably be having this as a topic of discussion at your staff meetings. So once a quarter, what's going on out there? Are we picking our heads up, and are we paying attention to everything that's happening in the bigger environment outside this company and outside this particular industry that we serve? Are there things happening that will affect the way we do business? Are there things happening that will affect the way our customers are doing business? And what can we do about it? How do we assure that we're either ahead of it, that we're doing something equally innovative and potentially disruptive, or how do we protect our assets in the process of a disruption? We have to be having these conversations to stay healthy and to stay viable into the future. Reading the tea leaves. We have to read the tea leaves. I see that there's one question about how do you better read the tea leaves. So one way to better read the tea leaves is paying attention to what's going on in your company. I was talking with someone a couple years ago that was a digital artist, pretty much at the top of his game. And I was asking him about his company and how the company was doing in sales and what was selling and what was happening. And he said, I don't know. That's not my area. I just want to create, great images for the work that we do. And all I could think was, wow, that's a bit short-sighted of you. So first of all, pay attention to what's going on within your own company. Know, what challenges the company has, know what's selling, know what customers are saying, understand what's happening at the top of your organization in the C-suite. What are people concerned with? What's the overall strategy of the organization? What is the organization trying to achieve this year? I mean, that is, to me, first and foremost, is really understanding your organization. First of all, it's going to give you such an edge over, others, and it's going to make you a good corporate citizen to really be knowing and thinking about, this is what this company is about, this is what it's facing, this is what we're good at, and this is how perhaps we need to be innovating for the future. But know what's happening within the walls of your own company. And then really pay attention to your industry. So one way to do that is, be really engaged in organizations like VMUG. When we come together with professionals that do the work we do, and that we can have conversations around what's happening, what's disrupting our space, what innovations are coming around, what kinds of things are we seeing from our customers, that is invaluable. I am in some professional associations for the work that I do. and getting together with my professional colleagues is one of the most energizing things I probably do. I feel like I am learning things all the time from my colleagues. I feel like I'm able to share what I've learned, and we all speak the same language. I can't tell you how many times I've come back from a meeting or, where I've said, wow, I never saw it that way, or that is something interesting, and I need to do a little bit more research on this and figure out, how that's going to impact my work and my business. So really paying attention to your industry. And beyond that, paying attention to world events, regional events, national events, and world events. Don't stick your head in the sand, but really look at what is happening around you. Are there things happening in your region that will affect your company or will affect your work? Are there things happening nationally, maybe on a policy level, maybe on a political level, any number of areas, advocacy, et cetera, that might affect your work? And then are there global trends that are happening that could impact your work, whether or not you have an international company? So really pay attention. And then I ask you, if you do all those things, will you see the next disruptor coming? And if so, what is it? I think you probably will if you do those things. But we always have to be looking out onto the horizon. And are there global factors that may cause disruption? So again, we talked about this earlier. Regional, national, and global. Pay attention to all of it. If you do, you won't get hit by the oncoming train. Thank you so much. I am going to turn this back over to Steve, who might be able to handle some questions for us. I'll be happy to chat with you about any issues you have on your mind now.
Awesome, Deborah. So we got a couple questions in here. I'll ask one from the audience, and then I might throw my own in here. But it says, if you are disrupting, I would think you're better off than the disruptee. Any advice on how to manage when you are the disruptee, or if the company you're employed by are the disruptee?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a good observation that, it's better to be the disruptor than the disruptee. None of us want to be a victim to anything. So if something is happening, from a disruption standpoint, and your company or your department is the disruptee, I think first you have to sort of have a meeting of the minds on what is it that's happening with this new disruption. How likely is it to impact us today, and sort of do some forecasting. What does it look like moving into the future? We need to ask ourselves, what can we be doing differently? And maybe it's not, doing the same thing as the disruptor, but it's doing different things. So in some cases, you may need to be looking at, okay, we see a disruption on the horizon. This disruptive company may be going after our customers or our clients. So then it may be an issue of how do we get to our clients? How do we either provide the same service or, as I said, maybe a different service? How do we do it better than what the disruptor is doing? So again, the first person to market doesn't always do it best. Lyft watched what Uber was doing, and Lyft came in afterward, and to a lot of people's way of thinking is doing a better job of what Uber has done, in leading the market. So, there are many decisions that have to be made when there's a disruption. It's, is there an opportunity for partnership in some cases? Might that company want, be looking to gobble us up? Are they looking for acquisitions? How do we feel about that? Are we able to, again, do something similar but different that sets us apart? Are we able to anticipate what this means, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road? Certainly, if it starts impacting your bottom line, that's when you need to start making really tough decisions. But there needs to be a series of conversations, I would think, in almost every area of the company when there is a disruptor. What I am hearing, though, is getting corporations to understand the disruption is happening soon enough. That's the issue, is making sure that we're understanding it soon enough. The sooner we understand it, we have many more options, right? We have a lot more options for either meeting or getting ahead of a disruption if we're identifying it early on. Once it's really taken hold and we're losing market share because of it, we are left with fewer options. So it really becomes that proactive stance of paying attention, having those conversations, and knowing when it's coming rather than letting it, it hit us like the oncoming train.
Well, that actually dovetails into another question. I know we're running a little short on time, but some of these are too good to pass up. So we got a question that says, how do we know when the train is coming?
How do you know when the train is coming? I think there's absolutely signs. You're losing market share. You have customers that are becoming disgruntled or dissatisfied with your service. You're hearing them ask for things potentially that you don't offer, but that another company does. Your customers may be going out to bid in a more aggressive way than they have in the past, which might mean that you're becoming more of a commodity than you've ever been. I think there are many things. It depends on your industry, it depends on what you're doing, but we all have metrics that we work against in our companies. We all have measurements of success. When we see any of those slipping, it's that's a real kind of a flashing red light warning sign when we see our metrics starting to slip, that we need to really pay attention to what's going on and investigate what's going on before that train hits us. But we can't wait, 3 quarters or 2 years of a downward trend to say, there might be something going on out there. We have to be very systematically and deliberately looking at what it is we're doing. Are we hitting our goals? Are we hitting our revenue goals? Are we, operationally sound? What's our customer feedback looking like? And if we see any of that slipping, there's signs that there's an oncoming train.
That's great. One of the things that I think about quite a bit as an IT practitioner and now a manager in IT is, how do we apply these principles to our sort of personal journeys, right? So a lot of us aren't in a position to be deciding strategy for our company, or, they don't often come down to IT and say, hey, what should we do with our marketing mix or our portfolio of products?
Right.
But how do we apply these principles so that we don't get personally disrupted in our careers and find ourselves being the only, Windows 2003 admin, on the market looking for a gig,
Exactly. Well, a couple of things. The first is that even in, wherever you're at in the company, you can be looking at disruption and you can be identifying it and you can be raising your hand and saying, I see something on the horizon. Or should we be talking about this? I was just wondering, is this something that we should be thinking about? Secondly, even if the overall company, and I think this goes with, if you work for a company that doesn't treat people well overall, and you decide to stay there, you can still treat people well. You can still treat your people well. The same goes with anything. If you have a company that's not innovating fast enough, or not paying attention to what's going on the outside, you as a manager of a department or even an individual contributor can still be innovative in your own work. No one is standing in the way of you doing that. If you feel at any point that you're really not aligned with the company and you feel like you see real danger signs coming and no one is paying attention, then I'm a big believer that you have to be an advocate for yourself and your own life and your own career. So I think those are some signs that perhaps there's an unhealthy culture or a culture of really not wanting to change or not wanting to pay attention to outside forces, and that would concern me. I also think that one way to really help yourself stay current and stay viable and keep your career viable is to constantly educate yourself. That, you really embrace a philosophy of continuous learning. And I'm a really big believer in that. People that are continuously learning are very rarely left behind in their career. So again, be interested, ask questions, meet with people, be engaged in your profession, not just in your company, but get to know people outside your company that do some of the work you do. Get yourself educated on new trends. Pay attention. watch the news, read, really great newspaper articles, and read, sound publications that have, scientific articles and that are factual and not, full of fluff. So just stay educated. It's an ongoing journey. You are never smart enough. You are never adept enough. None of us are. None of us are immune to becoming obsolete. So we have to consistently be reaching out and searching for new information and keeping ourselves educated along the way.
Wow, I just wrote that down. You are never smart or adept enough. I'm gonna frame that and put them in my office. I feel like we're just about out of time here. This has been great, Deborah. Before we go, I'm curious if you have any final thoughts or summarizations for our members or any of the attendees here today in the last couple seconds that we've got.
Sure. Well, I just think, you can rely on yourself to do this. Again, you may find yourself in a company that is not as adept at looking toward the future. It doesn't stop you. Don't let any company, any department handcuff you from being, sort of the best professional that you can be and being a thought leader. And you can be a thought leader inside your company, or you can be a thought leader outside your company and in your profession. So there's nothing holding you back. Get yourself up to speed on issues that you feel you may be lacking in. And, that helps you build confidence, which helps you become, more, I would say more outwardly visible to people in your industry and in your profession, and keeps you viable. So, no time like the present to find out what you don't know about, keep yourself educated, and put yourself out there.
Well, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Deborah, for your knowledge and insight on disruption and spending some more time with our members here today. And of course, to everyone who awesome. And of course, to everyone who joined today, thank you for attending and investing the hour, maybe a little bit more, with us to advance your career. If you have any thoughts or feedback, we'd love to hear it. Drop us a line. And make sure you don't miss the last webcast in our series, The Case for Innovation, that we're hosting on May 9th at 12 p.m. Central Time. You can register right now before you go back to your day by going to vmug.com and registering online. And with that, we'll wrap it up. So from VMUG, I'm Steve Athanas, and thanks to everyone, and have a great rest of your day.